Traders, how are you? Marcello here, founder of the Day Trading Academy, co-founder of Speed Up Trader, where you guys can come and trade with our money with just $120 after passing a very easy test. Today we're going to be doing the recap of what happened in the markets last week. Thank you so much for being in tune. I got a lot of the messages about the podcast for last week. We had some issues with the podcast upload, but this one should be just fine for those of you guys that are listening on the podcast. After a rough end of 2018, the S&P 500 has advanced 13% in the first 3 months of the year. That's the strongest quarter since 2009. The S&P 500 on Monday as well closed about 2% from its old historic high of 2930. The S&P 500 gains resulted in a technical benchmark, which is called the Golden Cross pattern, which is a cross in between two moving averages, which is the short term and the long term, that cross. And then once the price obviously goes above and you get the cross, which is quote unquote called the Golden Cross pattern, that's an indication of more near term upside. So in the short term, the expectation is definitely going to be that the market is going to continue to the upside. We'll probably make a new high, a new historic, a record high, but it's not really going to go up that much. It could come just shy of a record high, but I think we'll see some up action here in the next few weeks. But eventually it's going to come down because this can't continue forever. U.S. indices for the week, the Dow went up 1.83%, the S&P 500 1.94%, and the NASDAQ 2.57%. The overseas markets, the global markets boosted on Monday from positive data from China. The European markets opened with gains, and stocks in Asia ended their trading session higher as well. This basically on Monday was because of the prospects of a good trade deal between China and the U.S. And one thing I always want to remind you guys, outside of the fact that I'm never going to get political on the show, whether you love Trump, hate Trump, love Obama, hate Obama, left, right, center, black, white, coffee, color, whatever. I'm never going to get political. I'm just going to show you guys, I want you guys to understand how the world works, how the economy works, so you guys can obviously, do your thing in the markets. So the reason why I explain that is because I know that a lot of people have been talking about the Brexit and even the China deal. One week there's good news, another week maybe not, and then you see what I mean? So I'm not going to just inundate you with, this is supposedly going to happen and then not. So, when they have some concrete news about these things, then I'll actually let you guys know about that. The global markets rise continued on Tuesday as shares inched to a 6-month high overall. Oil went to 62. International oil, which is called Brent, neared 70 for the first time since November. And the U.S. showed renewed signs of strength, which is why the oil was a little bit limited on the upside. European and Asian shares stepped back up to 8-month highs on Thursday as investors hold back with fresh concerns about the U.S.-China trade deal. So you guys can see it's like one day, oh yeah, we got good news, whatever, and then another day, oh, that's bad news. It's just like back and forth. That's why I don't talk about it as much anymore. And another thing that was significant on Thursday was the troubling economic data from Germany, which obviously indicates a lot more trouble for Europe. European markets are higher. The Frankfurt, the DAX is up 4.20%, one of the biggest winners. Istanbul is up 5.33%. Istanbul, you guys should know, is part of Turkey. The Latin American markets for the week are mixed. The biggest winner is the Mexico exchange at 3.60% positive, and the Merval in Argentina went down 2.28%. Africa and Middle Eastern markets are mixed. Nigeria, the biggest economy in Africa, went down 4.81%. The biggest winner is Saudi Arabia at 3.13%. And Asian markets are also mostly higher for the week, with China, the SEC, being plus 5.05%. Big news in Bitcoin in the cryptocurrency space. Bitcoin saw a 15% bounce over the weekend, last weekend, which was, let me give you guys the dates. It was 30 and the 31st of March. Went to more than 4,800 over the weekend. Obviously, it led other virtual currencies higher. Ether and Ripple went up about 6%, and Bitcoin briefly hit $5,000 mark, the 5,000 mark on the Bitstamp exchange, excuse me. On Tuesday, Bitcoin bursted to its highest level in literally 5 months, as well as other cryptocurrencies. And what the reason why was because there was a major order by an anonymous buyer that triggered a frenzy in computer-driven trading. So you guys can see, I talk a lot about manipulation in the markets, even in cryptos, which is not even regulated, that exists as well. Overall, for the week, it went up 22.74%, and it got to $5,001 with 75 cents. Financial news, the U.S. market now is flirting with record highs. The unemployment is near the lowest in 50 years and wages are finally rising. The Trump administration, even though there's such good news, still wants the Federal Reserve to lower interest rates. Obviously, that helps the economy. If you guys don't know how that works, let me know. I'll include it in the next recap. One of the things that's important to note is when we have record unemployment, when we have wages starting to go up, the stock market at record highs, all this great news about the economy, that's when the good things are going to end, right? Because if you guys look in history, the great times when we have record lows, record of everything, the market can't stay there forever, right? It's not going to be good forever. Eventually it's going to have to come back, okay? Other than that, India's central bank interest rates, they cut them for the second time in just 2 months right before a crucial election. They cut the rate from 6.25 to 6, citing domestic and global economic slowdown as factors. Saudi Arabia is threatening to sell its oil in currencies other than the dollar. This is really, really huge news. The United States they have legislation in Congress where it's called NOPEC, where essentially they want to be able to sue OPEC for being a monopoly. And obviously, because they can control the oil prices, they want to be able to sue the organization and its partners, its members, I should say, in the U.S. Well, Saudi Arabia is saying if they do that, they're just going to go ahead and start selling oil and other things currencies other than the dollar. Really, really big news, because part of the reason why the U.S. has its empire status, let's say, is because they made an agreement with Saudi Arabia that Saudi Arabia was only going to sell its oil in dollars. So that created a worldwide demand for dollars. Anybody before, right, this is starting to change a little bit now, but everybody before needed to buy dollars in order to buy oil, which means that the sanctions that the U.S. puts in, everything revolves around the U.S. economy, and obviously being the largest in the world, there's some other things as well. But if they do that, it's going to undermine the dollar status as the world's main reserve currency, and it's going to weaken the ability of the U.S. to put in sanctions. So that's going to be big, big news if that actually happens. In commodities, the Saudi Arabia oil company, the state-owned oil company, remember that Saudi Arabia is a kingdom, not a democracy like the U.S., so it's owned by the kings and the royal family in Saudi Arabia, had a revenue of $355.9 billion. They have almost $50 billion cash on hands at the end of 2018 and debt of only $27 billion. This was helped by a 31% increase in average oil prices between 2017 and 2018. And Aramco made $111 billion last year, making it the most profitable company in the world. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia also has 226 billion barrels of crude reserves, enough for 52 years if they're producing at max capacity of 12 million barrels a day. That's a lot of money. Contrary to analyst expectations of a drawdown in U.S. crude inventories of 500,000 barrels of oil, there was actually an increase of 7.2 million barrels. That's going to slow the increase of U.S. oil prices. Overall, for the week, U.S. crude went up 3.31%, international Brent went up 2.60%, and precious metals were lower for the week. Gold went down 0.32% and silver 0.13%. Economy news, Chinese government is saying that the factory orders are starting to pick up with new orders, and they're starting to hire workers again, defying the recent slowdown in the world's second largest economy. Obviously, China has a huge manufacturing industry, and it unexpectedly rebounded in March. The number of Americans filing for unemployment benefits dropped to a 49-year low last week despite slowing economic growth, and the U.S. employment growth went from a 17-month low in March at 196,000, obviously because of the fears of a sharp slowdown in the economic growth in Q1. The unemployment's still at 3.8%, and the labor participation is at 63%. Australia is going to expect a recession-free growth into a third decade. If I'm not mistaken, they took the record of the longest expansion on record. They're now going to go into the third decade. Officials are promising a budget surplus for 2019-2020 starting in July 1st, even though it's downgrading the forecast for the coming years. Corporate news, Apple is the most profitable public firm. They made $59.4 billion in 2018, just over 50% of the profit that Saudi Aramco did. ExxonMobil, which is the largest U.S. oil company, made $20.8 billion. And Shell, the largest publicly trading oil firm, made $23.4 billion. So much money. I don't know what these people do with so much money. Lyft's IPO, well, obviously, oil, there's a lot of investment involved in risk, but Lyft's IPO was a success last Friday. They started as shares at about $72, which valued the firm at $20.5 billion. They're still not making any money, FYI, in case you guys didn't know. Just like Uber, they're losing billions. They gained 8.7% in the debut, and then on Friday it went down to about $74. CEO of Facebook, Zuckerberg, toughened rules on political advertising and is boosting the fight of misinformation, but he still can't promise, he says, that there's going to be an interference-free EU elections, because obviously it's Russia's fault. Russia made you vote for who you want to vote for. U.S. Trump administration now is considering imposing sanctions on foreign firms that are doing business with Venezuela. They also want to put in more sanctions on the state-run company of Venezuela, the oil company called PDVSA, and obviously to try to cut off the revenue for President Maduro. Trade deal between the U.S. and China is there's some new news about it that Trump is going to give them up to 2025 to comply with the commitments. This has to do with the commodity purchases as well as American companies being able to own 100% of the enterprises in the Asian nation, because before China made them partner up with Chinese companies. The Trump administration is also looking for ways to limit damage from closing the border in the south with Mexico. One of the problems is it's $1.7 billion that travels through the border. There's over 500,000 people that travel legally as well, workers, students, shoppers, and tourists, so not the easiest thing to do. Facebook, Zuckerberg is saying that he's calling for new global regulations governing the internet. He's recommending overarching rules on hateful and violent content, election integrity, privacy, and data portability. Obviously, I think this is a little bit sensitive because it depends what you consider violent or hateful, right? There's a lot of people, for example, say that what Trump says is hateful. So what if somebody on the left or the right gets into president and they just don't like what somebody else says? This is one of the beauties with the United States, where we believe in freedom of speech, right? It doesn't matter where you're from. There's always an open table for debate and conversation. So I think this is very, very dangerous, no matter what side of the table you're on. Unclear at first, but Verizon has launched 5G wireless service in parts of Chicago and Minneapolis. In South Korea, in Seoul, which is the capital, they deployed the service as well, so 5G is coming. Investment news, over 1 million acres of farmland are covered by water in March with billions of dollars in losses. They call it the bomb cyclone storm, left 9 grain-producing states absolutely flooded. We have corn, wheat, and soy, which are probably going to go down in output this year. Past decade of ultra-low interest rates has allowed a lot of rising of what's called zombie companies, debt-laden firms that can't make enough to cover their interest payments. The number of large-scale zombies companies in advanced economies in 2018 was at 536, 13% of the global total. At the height, just before the Great Recession, the number stood at 626. So another possible indication as well. Pharmaceutical firms are defying political pressure by raising the price of almost 3,000 drugs in the U.S. Drug costs have increased by 4 times the amount of inflation. So, one of the things that I also want you guys to know in terms of inflation is there's a difference between real inflation and the government listed inflation. For example, you guys can see that the price of a TV over the last few years, maybe a few decades, has dropped dramatically. But the cost of something like pharmaceutical drugs or tuition at university has skyrocketed by double digits, triple digits. So that obviously is causing a concern. A lot of people, including employers, health insurers, and also consumers. CEO Jeff Bezos is seen essential to Amazon's future growth. So after his divorce, he's retaining voting control of his entire $143 billion stake in the firm. His now ex-wife, Mackenzie Bezos, is going to own 25% of those shares, but she's not going to be able to control, have a decision making, let's say, on that. She is now going to become the 23rd richest person in the world and have a 4% stake in Amazon, makes her the fourth person, the wealthiest person in the world. So it's that easy, guys. Just find yourself a rich man or a rich woman, and it's that easy. U.S. is cutting off aid to the countries in what's considered the Northern Triangle, El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras, after the American president, Trump, blasted them for sending migrants to the U.S. That's going to be about $700 million. Mexican President Obrador is saying that he does want to limit He wants to try to limit the Central Americans passing through the territory, but the actual root cause of the migration has to be addressed. That's what he said. U.S. Administration Economic Advisor is saying that the U.S. has rapid plans to try to vitalize the Venezuelan economy, including financial and food planning, as well as getting cash into the country. EU government is condemning measures in Venezuela from the Constituent Assembly, allowing for the trial of the opposition leader Juan Guaido, when a lot of Western countries consider him the actual legitimate president. And in unusual facts this week, a new imperial system in Japan, when the Crown Prince Naruhito becomes emperor on May 1st. The new age is going to be called Reiwa, and it's causing a lot of stocks in companies that have various connections to the new era name starting to increase. Burger King is starting to allow customers to try vegetarian Whoppers in stores near and around St. Louis. They're made with plant-based patties from Impossible Foods. They're going to call them Impossible Whoppers. According to the Heritage Foundation's Index of Economic Freedom, Sweden, Norway, Finland, Iceland, and Denmark rank among the 30 most capitalist countries in the world. In my humble opinion, I still think the U.S. is number one. I think a lot of those countries, in my opinion, are actually a lot more socialist now than they were before, than capitalist. There's an earlier reputation of them being socialist is largely outdated, they're saying, and due to outgoing numerous market-based economic and financial reforms. So they're saying that they're actually going back to capitalism. Leading investors and scientists are criticizing the IEA for climate change forecast considered too friendly to fossil fuels. U.S. Department of Justice sends Academy of Motion Pictures and Arts and Sciences a letter of concern, stating that the potential changes to the requirements of rewards limiting eligibility to companies like Netflix may spark antitrust concerns. New York Governor Cuomo is making the highest salary in the U.S. among governors. By the year 2021, is going to make $250,000 a year, while the California governor is the highest paid in 2019 at $201,680. Just so you guys know, California actually has the highest rate of poverty in the United States, so maybe you should share some of that money. Warren Buffett is saying that he'd like to make an elephant-size investment, minimum of $25 billion, since he has about $110 billion in cash. And that's the news for this week, guys. Let me know if you guys have any questions. Don't forget to subscribe here to the channel. We'll see you next week.